Okay guys, today I am stirring up some corn and tomato salsa, it's called corn and tomato relish, but it to me is a lot like a salsa with just a hint of sweet in it. What I've got in here, everything is set up because we are going to do a small batch canning on it today. So this particular recipe only makes 2 small jars, so 2 jelly jar size portions of the relish. And we're going to use it's called a 4th burner or an optional burner kettle back here, often used in small batch canning. So we have our jars. They have been hand washed with soap and water, rinsed well, and we're going to sterilize them by putting them down in boiling water for about 5 minutes. We could have skipped this step had we run the jars through the dishwasher, because the dishwasher by nature would have sanitized the jars for us. We would just want to make sure to keep them warm until we were ready to put our relish in there, because if you put hot relish into cool canning jars, you often run the risk of them busting while you're preparing them. So jars are in the basket and going into the water, and those are just going to sanitize while the relish is cooking. And I'm going to go over in just a second with that, what is in there. Jars in, lids on. Before we wash the jars, we made sure to check them for flaws or errors. So that means taking the jar, holding it up to a light, and kind of turning them around and looking. And what you're looking for are tiny imperfections such as bubbles in the glass or cracks in the glass. Those items could indicate that when you get that down into the boiling water to actually water bath process, that you could have a ruptured jar. Now sometimes that's a flaw in the manufacturing, and sometimes it's just because we've used the jar more than once or more than twice, and in just the natural use of it, it has become damaged. So those jars were already inspected. We also want to inspect the ring. This is called the canning ring. So we again kind of look up at the light. We want to make sure there's no dents, there's no rust, there's no caked on food of any kind. You saw my post the other day, you saw that I had to throw a lot of these away because they had rusted in storage. We also want to inspect the lid. This is the actual lid, so ring, lid. You want to take the lid as well. You want to make sure that it's never been used before for canning, because that would mess with the integrity of this rubber seal here. We don't want these to be dented, rusted, to have those seals messed up or missing. This should be a brand new, never been used before lid. We're going to take some boiling water. I just microwaved mine because we're doing a small batch. So hot water. You're going to set those lids down in there, and that activates that rubber gasket for us. So into the water it goes. Let's talk about our recipe here. This recipe is from a book called Food in Jars, or Preservation by the Pint. Both of those cookbooks, really good cookbooks, really good beginner recipes for small batches. I use them all the time now that there's less of us at home and I'm just not canning as often. It's called corn and tomato relish. What we have in here is 2 cups of corn kernels. That can be fresh corn kernels that you cut off the cob. You'd need 3 cobs, or you could just measure out frozen or canned corn, drained of course. 1 cup of peeled and diced tomatoes. If you have an abundance of cherry tomatoes like I do, you don't necessarily have to peel them, but chop them up really nicely. You're going to add to that half a cup of bell pepper and 1/4 cup of hot peppers. So adjust to your own heatness. I like things spicy and hot, so I'd use a mostly hot pepper. But when you're looking at a total of a few, like at 3/4 a cup of peppers. Make however much of that a sweet pepper and however much of that a hot pepper that works best for your taste. It will not affect the integrity of the recipe. You're also going to add 1/4 cup of a chopped onion, and then we're going to start putting in other things. 1 cup of cider vinegar. You're going to get that nice juice from that cider vinegar. You're going to add in 1/3 cup of granulated sugar. That's going to give us that nice syrupy base. You need a teaspoon of yellow mustard seed, just the seeds, and then a teaspoon of ground cumin and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. What we're going to do is put all of that into a nice saucepan. You want to bring to boil, reduce to simmer, and simmer about 10 minutes. I have 4 minutes left on my simmer here. And the reason that we're simmering it, first and foremost, we want to kind of sterilize the vegetables. You really do want to, in some length, cook your produce that's come in from the garden or come in from the farmer's market or even the grocery store, because vegetables and fruits are living organisms. They are organic, they are natural, organic meaning living things. So they're going to have a level of bacteria, possibly dirt, bugs, whatever. Wash well, cook a little bit before processing. Yes, they will cook some in the processing method, but we just want to go ahead and do that. And in a case like a relish or a salsa or a jelly, sometimes we have to get it to a point before it can be used or it's not going to set right. Most of the time with salsas, you're bringing that acidity to the right point and you're blending and marrying those flavors together. In a jelly or jam, you're cooking to a point where everything will gel correctly when it's done and it's set. And then that processing time is often factored into it, and it's fine. Once we get this done, we have our jars, our lids, our rings, and we have a jar lifter. Many people are not going to have all of the equipment or the aesthetic equipment, or maybe not ready to invest in what we use in canning. But this one, it can be purchased by itself. It really is valuable because it has this rubber coating on the end, on the lifter pieces. And that way, when you're pinching and grabbing these jars, you're not at risk of nicking, scratching, in any way getting glass or errors or damage onto the jar. That's valuable. Now, some of them come in a kit where they will have a headspace wand that has looks like little stair steps on the bottom. I don't have mine with me today. My canning kits are at my office and I'm at my house, so unfortunately I don't have it with me today. But when we go to fill these jars, we're going to make sure to leave headspace. That means we're going to have space between the food and the lid, and that way the high acidity of these ingredients doesn't affect or start rusting and molding up against the top of that lid. So we're going to do a pretty hefty headspace. We also want to get all of the bubbles out of the jar. So when we put the food in, sometimes air gets trapped. Air is not our friend when it comes to canning. We are going to make sure that we put something down in there. I have a wooden skewer. Don't use metal. You can use a plastic knife or even a baby spoon or a skewer, but you're going to just kind of stick it down in there and move things around. We're not doing this. This puts air in. We're just going to move things around to make sure there's no pockets of air in there. We will then place our lid onto the canning jar, and we will time up. Then we'll put the rings on, lower them back down into the water. So with the timer done, that means that our salsa is ready. We're going to turn the heat off and just give it a second to settle down. That timer also means that our jars are done. So we're going to lift that lid off carefully using our tongs. We're going to pull the basket. If you buy this fourth burner, it's also called a pasta pot or fourth burner pot. It comes with the basket. Really super convenient, really nice for getting the jars in and out. I'm just tipping some of the water out, putting that over here, and we're about ready to start assembling things. So again, rubber tipped jar lifter is real nice. Of course, it's a little hard to do when they're not laying in there the right way. So we have our two small jars and one that does not want to come out. There we go. You know, that never happens unless you're on video. Okay. So, 2 jars ready to go. We're keeping the water boiling in the back because this is the boiling water that we're going to put the jars back into in a minute. So I'm going to set the lid back on there for now and keep that heat on. As we start to put things in here, you may want to use a funnel, and I've left mine over here. Let me grab it. This just helps us to be less likely to make a ginormous mess as we try to put our relish into the jars. right, here we go. We have ladle and jar. These jars are really nice and hot, so be careful if you're picking them up like I am. Of course, I'm using a heat-safe silicone glove. And again, we're just gonna fill, I'll show you on this one. We are gonna fill to this line. See, these are kind of our cheaters here. So this gives us that nice big headspace that we wanted so that the food isn't touching the top of the lid and causing us any issue. When you're using something that has like a syrupy base to it, like this relish, make sure that you're not just getting the relish, but you're also getting some of that syrupy goodness, because that's part of the sauce, right? That's important stuff. Don't leave it behind. Okay. One jar, fairly full. Again, so we're looking at it, we're going to release bubbles, pushing it down in there, and we're just going to go around and move a little bit. We don't want to jam air down into it. Just release some bubbles. All right, time to fill the next one. And again, this is a small batch. Normally, your salsas and your jellies and jams are going to make about 6 of these jars. This is a small preservation, so it only makes 2. Don't be surprised if when you're getting down to the bottom of the recipe, you realize that maybe there's a little extra left over in the pan that didn't make it into the jar. Remember, all of us cut vegetables a little differently, so it's completely normal for that to happen. Just, that's your good stuff to taste now, right? So you don't have to wait. Once we have the food in the jars, we're going to use a clean, damp paper towel to wipe the rims. We don't want any food up here that could get between the lid, the rings, or anything like that. That'll cause bacteria to grow. So we're wiping those rims down, really careful. It's hot, so be careful. You just put boiling food in there. All right, we are going to use the clean side of this stick to pick these lids up very carefully. They do make a little magnetic wand that pulls these up. It's best if you don't touch that rubber seal. So just drop it on there. Let's do the other one really quick. And like I said, I'm doing this without tools for 2 reasons. One is my stuff is at my office and I'm at home, so I don't have it with me. But the other is not everyone is right off the bat gonna run out and buy canning kits. So we're gonna try and do what we can with what we have. Once we have the lids on, rings go on, finger tight. We are not cranking this on here like we are, you know, He-Man. We are just gently finger tightening these. If we get it too tight, we can encourage things as they heat and expand to break the jar. We don't want to break the jar. We can all tell you about broken jars. No one wants a broken jar. Okay. So we've got these finger tight, not too tight. We're going to put them back in the basket. I'm using my jar lifter simply because they're hot. So down in the basket they go. In this canner, we stack them one on top of the other, just like this. If they don't fit, that's fine. You can do them separately, one jar at a time. So here we go. Get my, try not to boil off my fingers today. We're gonna lower the basket down slowly. Remember that water's boiling, right? Very careful. Since these are larger jars, we can only do one at a time in this particular type canner. So that's completely fine. Remember, we're just by boiling it, so it won't be that big of a deal. Put the lid back on. This is gonna come back to boil really quickly because everything's hot. Once it is at that rolling boil where you can hear the water rolling, we're gonna set this timer for 15 minutes. When that 15 minutes is up, we turn the heat off and ignore it for 5 minutes. After that 5-minute time period is finished, we're gonna open it up and pull the jar out. Once the jar is out, we can sit it on a surface. So I have here just a plate with a towel. We're gonna set it down there and not disturb it. We're gonna leave it alone. We don't wanna bother it for 24 hours. That 24-hour time period gives the lid and the seal and the food time to settle, to vacuum out the oxygen, which we don't want in our canned goods, And you'll usually hear that little pop and ping, which means you know that the jar is sealed. Another way to tell, and I'll show you on this one because it won't do it, is this won't press down. So you can maybe hear that it's pressing down, it wiggles. A completely sealed jar will be it'll have sunk in, and you will not be able to wiggle it at all. What if you get it out and 24 hours later you can still wiggle the lid? You have two options. Pop it in the refrigerator and eat it within a month, or reprocess it in water and try to seal it again. But remember, that's cooking it one more time, so you may end up with a lot softer or different textured product than you were expecting. All right, here goes the timer. Check back in with me later.